May 14th, 1945, New York Harbor. The fog lifted just after dawn, revealing gray towers rising from the Atlantic like broken teeth. 14-year-old Klaus Werner gripped the ship's railing with both hands, his knuckles white against the cold steel. He had spent 3 weeks below deck in a cargo hold that smelled of vomit and fear. Around him stood men twice his age wearing the same sand-colored uniforms, stiff from dried seawater, all marked with the letters PW, prisoner of war. When the first American soldier appeared at the gangway, Klaus expected rifle butts and shouting. Instead, the guard waved them forward with 2 fingers, almost bored. And in that moment, Klaus realized something impossible. They were not going to die here. Before we continue with this remarkable story, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop a comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up, because stories like these deserve to be remembered. History isn't just about battles and dates. It's about the human moments that changed everything. And what happened to these young German prisoners on American soil would challenge everything they'd been taught about their enemy. Klaus had never seen a city untouched by war. In Hamburg, buildings leaned like drunken men, their facades scorched black. In London, during his brief captivity there, bomb craters pocked every street like open wounds. But here, glass windows caught the morning sun. Cranes swung cargo through the air with mechanical precision. Beyond the piers, billboards painted red and yellow advertised soap and cigarettes as if the world had never burned. The air itself tasted strange, heavy with diesel fuel, fresh bread, and something impossibly sweet. Sugar, perhaps. A substance Klaus had not tasted in 2 years. A Red Cross nurse stood near the gangway holding 2 tin buckets. Inside them, apples. Perfect, waxy, impossibly round apples. She gestured for each prisoner to take one. Her hand trembled slightly as she extended the bucket toward Klaus. He took the fruit carefully, as if it might vanish. It was cold and smooth, too perfect to be real. He slipped it into his coat pocket, saving it for later, for when he could believe this wasn't a trick. And then he heard the realization that broke him completely. The sound of his name, not barked, but spoken normally by an American soldier checking a manifest. The year was 1944, and across America, a landscape of captivity was taking shape. More than 425,000 German prisoners scattered through 700 camps, from Mississippi cotton fields to Wyoming foothills. Among them, a handful were not soldiers at all. They were boys. Farm hands pressed into uniforms before their voices deepened. Auxiliaries swept up when Germany's ranks collapsed. Children as young as 12 years old, captured with weapons they barely knew how to use. The United States had prepared with typical precision. Every camp followed the same blueprint. Wooden barracks arranged in quadrangles. Guard towers at every corner. A whitewashed chapel or canteen near the center. The system ran on rules thicker than any rifle barrel. The Geneva Convention enforced capacity limits, calorie counts, schooling requirements, and leisure time. This wasn't charity. It was principle. America wanted to prove that democracy could discipline itself even when the enemy could not. Camp Concordia in Kansas, Camp McCain in Mississippi, Camp Hearn in Texas. Each followed the same heartbeat. Reveille at dawn. Work details at 8. Evening assemblies under floodlights. Most men were strong enough for labor, cotton harvests, road maintenance, sawmill crews. For the convalescent, the older, and the too young, work turned into classes, reading circles, and endless waiting. Klaus Werner arrived among them. At 14 years old, he was too frail to work, too shy to rebel, too young to have the swagger that war had printed on others. He became a ward of the camp hospital, an odd-job helper to medics who tolerated his silence because he moved quickly and smiled when spoken to. He swept floors. He fed chickens that pecked along the wire fence. He watched everything with the careful attention of someone who had learned that missing details could get you killed. The rules of captivity were both firm and strange. Prisoners addressed guards as sir and saluted the flag each morning out of respect rather than submission. In return, they were paid in coupons redeemable for cigarettes, chocolate bars, and stationery. Mail traveled through sensors like bottled messages to another planet. 5 lines of script that might take months to crawl across the Atlantic. Punishment usually meant loss of privileges, not rations. Letters from Kansas mothers sometimes arrived containing knitted gloves or photographs signed to a German boy whose name they didn't know. "My son is somewhere in yours," one read. Local curiosity softened hostility faster than any directive. Children from nearby farms climbed fences to trade candy for buttons. Shopkeepers in Emporia and Salina noticed how the prisoners stared into store windows, not for escape routes, but for novelty. Light bulbs, radios, oranges piled in pyramids like treasure. Once or twice, civic leaders invited camp orchestras to play Sunday concerts through the wire for townspeople who stood outside listening. To everyone's surprise, the music sounded familiar. Mozart, Strauss, American marches learned from their guards. The crowd applauded and returned the next weekend. For Klaus, the first weeks were overwhelming. He had spent his life in bomb shelters and ration lines. Even discipline that promised safety felt alien. He watched the guards cut grass with motorized mowers, machines he had never seen. When they handed him a glass of milk still cold enough to sweat, he drank too fast and coughed it back up. The white liquid on his sleeve looked like purity itself wasted. Later he helped sweep the barracks, tracing his palm along the smooth pine walls that carried the clean smell of resin. A scent of order, not fear. This reversal wasn't universal. Some prisoners worried that softness dulled vigilance. Others, steeped in propaganda, mistrusted politeness as deliberate deception. Yet, day by day, America refused to produce villains. Complaints sent to command often amounted to boredom, not brutality. In Geneva reports, inspectors wrote that morale in U.S. compounds was paradoxically high. They explained that constant predictability proved more exhausting to hatred than isolation ever could. Meals came on enamel trays, meatloaf, white bread, fruit cocktails so sweet it made Klaus's gums ache. He wrote about it in a letter through the Red Cross form card, limited to 25 words. Healthy, food good, American strange but kind, dream of milk. He would later learn his mother never received it. Hamburg's mail center stood in ashes. But the simple act of writing under no threat already felt like proof the world had not ended. If the guards noticed their effect, they never spoke of it. Their job was structure, work, count, lights out. Yet small accidents reshaped everything. Klaus dropped a tray of dishes once during inspection. When he flinched, expecting punishment, The American sergeant knelt instead, helped him gather the pieces, and said, "Just dishes, kid. Nobody gets shot for that here." Something inside the boy cracked more permanently than the porcelain. After that he began to hum while he worked. Tunes from a childhood in Cologne, drowned by sirens, now returned as faint melodies beneath the hiss of boilers. Winter 1944 gave way to Kansas spring, a slow thaw of snow into black mud. By day a mirror of the sun, by night a glaze of ice again. For weeks the prairie winds carried two alternating scents: fertilizer from distant farms and grain coffee drifting from the camp kitchens. Inside that world of routine, Klaus began to test what enemy actually meant. One day, an American corporal named Sam Harper found him standing transfixed by a broom, turning it over carefully, marveling at the polished handle. "Back home we got factories making 100 of those a day," Harper said, half smiling. Klaus understood nothing but the tone. The guard mimed a brushing motion, and Klaus burst out laughing, not at the joke, but at the absurdity of being taught sweeping by a man with a rifle. It was the first sound of genuine laughter to cut through the ward that month. Sunday afternoons brought the loudest paradox of all: freedom scheduled. Thin wires of music drifted from a barrack where prisoners strummed guitars fashioned from scrap. In the yard, Americans and Germans played improvised soccer barefoot, laughing, even wagering cigarettes on goals. Klaus could not join. He was too small. But he learned American cheers anyway, mispronouncing each syllable until both sides teased him affectionately. "Attaboy, Klaus," they'd shout when he retrieved the ball from under guard trucks. To a child who had known only uniformed men barking orders, the sound of his name spoken with warmth was miracle enough. Later came a quiet turning point disguised as accident. A local farm family near the camp lost a team of hands to the front lines, and the colonel approved a new work detail. PW Farm Program Number 34. Klaus, though technically too young, was sent as interpreter for a small group hauling hay under supervision. They rode past the fence in the back of a quarter-ton truck as townspeople watched curiously, some wary, some waving. At midday the farmer's wife brought them lemonade, handing plastic cups one by one. She stopped at Klaus last, offering an extra cookie meant for her own son overseas. He accepted it with stiff fingers, trying and failing to hide tears so hot they startled even him. She said softly, "Eat, child, you're someone's boy." He didn't understand the words, but never forgot the tone. When they returned to camp that night, even the older prisoners noticed his dazed expression. "What did they do to you out there?" one joked. Klaus simply held up the cookie tin, showing the crude American heart printed on the tin's lid. "They gave me this," he said quietly, half German, half English. For days he guarded the empty container as if it were armor. The camp itself changed subtly with the seasons. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, new arrivals poured in from Europe. Defeated men who expected revenge and found baseball games instead. Some refused to believe it. Others melted into gratitude almost shameful to display. The Americans sensed this disbelief more keenly among the youngest. They treated the boys differently, like students, not soldiers. By August, the chaplain organized English lessons in the old recreation hall. Klaus sat beside men twice his size, mouthing sounds that felt impossible. The teacher demonstrated. "Thank you." Klaus practiced against his sleeve until he could whisper the words and be understood. He learned faster than expected. Guards greeted him across the yard. Townspeople brought him pencils, a new pair of shoes, even a comic book whose bright colors stunned him. Inside its panels, cowboys galloped through endless yellow plains, the same plains now rising just beyond the fence. It occurred to him that perhaps peace wasn't something handed down by governments. Maybe it was simply what humans decided to live with when nobody interrupted. One by one, the older men began calling him Unser Amerikanischer Jung, our American boy. He laughed, embarrassed, but secretly thought the name sounded true. Autumn came back to Kansas with long shadows and cinnamon-colored air. Leaves from the cottonwoods along the riverbank cartwheeled across the compound before settling against the wire. Inside the camp, trucks idled in neat rows, mufflers popping softly like the last heartbeats of summer. The notice board outside the command post held 2 new sheets of paper typed in carbon ink, repatriation lists. The war was over, and Germany's sons 6,000 miles from home were finally going back. Klaus Werner found his name on the second sheet, printed unevenly near the bottom. Transport Group 3, Hamburg District. He stared at the letters for a long time, half proud that he could now read them quickly, and half wishing he could not. He was 16 now, still a prisoner, yet already free in ways the boy who'd boarded that troop ship 2 years earlier could never have imagined. In the days before departure, the camp slowed into reflective rhythm. The guards let the prisoners roam across the yard after evening roll call, trusting them now as men rather than quotas. Through open windows came the sound of harmonicas and laughter mixed with Midwest cicadas. Klaus joined his English class one last time. The teacher, a corporal from Ohio, wrote 8 words on the blackboard. "You will always remember your first day in America." The men nodded politely, unsure what he meant. Klaus understood perfectly. On the morning of transport, mist hung low over the fields, pale and unmoving, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The frost had not yet burned away, and each blade of grass carried a thin skin of ice that cracked softly under boots. Lined up by the gate, the uniformed boys who had arrived years earlier with hollowed cheeks and oversized coats now stood straighter, broader in the shoulders, their faces unfamiliar even to themselves. Boys who had aged into men without ceremonies, without photographs, without the comfort of believing the world had noticed. They carried duffel bags heavy with small things that mattered. A carved wooden horse made from scrap lumber, a chess set fashioned from melted toothpaste tubes and blackened wire, folded paper holding sketched portraits of camp nurses, farm families, or imagined sweethearts, a few pressed flowers, flattened between Bible pages or old manuals, gifts from local girls who had smiled at them across fences and never asked questions. The gate creaked open. The commandant walked down the row slowly, deliberately, shaking hands as if this were a graduation rather than a departure into uncertainty. He paused often, searching faces, matching names to memories. When Klaus's turn came, the man removed his cap and said, "You've grown tall, son." It was the sort of remark any father might make without thinking. But in that moment, it carried the weight of 2 nations trying to stand up again after years spent kneeling in rubble. Klaus swallowed hard. He had no answer prepared for that kind of kindness. He simply nodded. As the line began to move, a guard stepped close and pressed something small into Klaus's palm. A smooth red apple, warm from being carried in a coat pocket. much like the one Klaus had taken from the dock years before, when hunger had been louder than caution. His fingers curled around it automatically. No one said the word goodbye. That word would have made things fragile. Instead, they nodded, hands lifted briefly. Engines started. The trucks waited like patient animals. The convoy rumbled east through the wheat belt under a sunrise the color of brass. Light spilled across the fields in long bands, illuminating silos, fences, and distant farmhouses still asleep. Towns passed in sequence, each marked by water towers and depot signs. Topeka, St. Louis, Pittsburgh. At every crossing, people stopped what they were doing to watch the line of vehicles marked POW transport. Some waved, a few saluted. Others simply stood, hats in hand, unsure what expression fit the moment. Klaus watched from the truck bed, the wind tearing at his collar. He tried to fix each place in memory, knowing he might never see them again. He had learned the rhythm of American roads, the patience of wide skies. These landscapes had raised him almost as much as the camp had. At the docks in New York Harbor, ships waited with decks stripped clean for passengers. Gray hulls, utilitarian and silent. Before boarding, Army photographers took identification pictures. The men stood before a blank backdrop, names called, numbers checked. When the flash bulb burst in white light, Klaus blinked fiercely, and for the first time raised his chin straight to the camera without fear. He did not know why that mattered, only that it did. The crossing was quiet. Seasickness, cards, long silences broken by cough and murmured German drifting across the deck. At night, Klaus stood alone near the rail, staring into darkness that felt deeper than any night he remembered. Somewhere beyond it lay home, or what remained of it. Home was harder. Hamburg had become a skeleton of red brick and broken glass. Streets ended abruptly where buildings had collapsed inward. Windows stared out empty. The air smelled of soot, damp stone, and absence. His mother met him at a displaced persons center, thinner than memory allowed, her hair pulled back tightly as if holding herself together by force. Her eyes were older than her years. She held his face between her hands for a long moment without speaking. When she finally asked about America, Klaus reached into his bag and placed his few treasures on the table. An English primer with notes in the margins, his name tag, edges worn smooth, and the apple now faded, wrinkled, carefully preserved, despite the absurdity of it. He said in German, accented now by English vowels, they fed us. They forgave us from the first day. She nodded silently, not quite believing him, yet unwilling to doubt the certainty in his voice. In the years that followed, Klaus carried that invisible justice like a hidden compass. It shaped his choices, civility in speech, patience in waiting. During Reconstruction in Hamburg, he learned carpentry from an American engineer and helped build schools from salvaged beams. On a workshop wall, he painted a phrase memorized from a nurse's badge. Decades later, journalists found former German POWs astonished, treated not as enemies, but as men. Well-fed, well-guarded, dignity restored through fair rules and meaningful work. Klaus wrote, "How do you thank kindness arriving with captivity?" Perhaps no answer existed. Camps vanished, photos remained. One boy smiled with apple, seeing good.